Have you heard about the hottest new thing in Washington?
The Green New Deal.
Green New Deal.
Green New Deal.
The Green New Deal. Should it aim to create jobs and other social policies, or focus solely on stemming climate change? This is Trump on Earth. I'm Julie Grant. The Green New Deal is a policy resolution introduced by Democrats, Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Senator Edward Markey. It's a sweeping set of ideals, a quick move to renewable energy and energy efficiency, upgrading the electricity grid and the transportation system. It also includes a jobs guarantee that jobs will pay a family-sustaining wage. The Green New Deal has gotten ridiculed by President Trump.
No planes. No energy. When the wind stops blowing, that's the end of your electric. Let's hurry up. Darling? Darling, is the wind blowing today? I'd like to watch television, darling.
Well, most Democratic presidential candidates have signed on to the Green New Deal, at least to the idea of pushing the nation toward renewable energy and equalizing the economy. Trump and Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell are using the proposal to paint Democrats as socialists.
Our nation has watched the Democratic Party take a sharp and abrupt left turn toward socialism. And nothing encapsulates this as clearly as the huge self-inflicted national wound the Democrats are agitating for, called the Green New Deal.
An editorial in the Washington Post also criticized the Green New Deal, saying the focus needs to be on climate change alone. Here's the quote. "The goal is so fundamental that policymakers should focus above all else on quickly and efficiently decarbonizing. They should not muddle this aspiration with other social policy, such as creating a federal jobs guarantee." Well, we wanted to get some different perspectives on this. We'll hear why the Washington Post and others say the nation needs to focus first on carbon pricing. But first, we wanted to hear more about the Green New Deal and jobs. With us to talk about this is Joseph Kane. He's a senior research associate with the Brookings Institution. Hi, Joe.
Hi, Julie. How are you doing?
So you and your colleagues wrote a piece about the Green New Deal, calling its vision exciting and solid, and that the transition to a cleaner economy can be expected to bring jobs for all kinds of workers. What is the Green New Deal, from how you understand it?
Sure. Well, the Green New Deal still, I would argue, has many unknowns. But I would say the aim of sort of this vision, right, that's been put forth by Democrats and others is well, how can we really clean the economy, both in terms of physical infrastructure investments and investments in technologies and so forth, but then also how can we also help people, right, and sort of deliver those social aims as well. And so to me, that they kind of go hand in hand, right, of per a lot of the work that I've done with my colleagues of, well, infrastructure investment, it's not just about physical sort of investments in the systems themselves and improving those systems, which we know certainly need help, but actually investing in that human capital, too. And what does that mean for communities? So the Green New Deal certainly raises some of these issues, really puts them on that front burner where they've been, I think, simmering for some time. But hopefully this provides a window of opportunity for not only leaders in Washington, but really leaders throughout the country to think about these issues, too.
Again, the Green New Deal calls for something called a federal jobs guarantee. What is that?
There's some differing interpretations of what that means, but at least in the resolution for the Green New Deal itself, really the production or really creation of family prevailing wages through jobs, right, in this transition to a clean economy. And so however many jobs that creates in the end is still, I think, open to debate. What sectors those jobs are in, what wages very precisely, what those mean over time, I think is still up in the air, but I think the goal is to create opportunities really for all types of workers across all skill levels to gain really on-the-job training pathways to long-term careers where they do have an opportunity to earn wages that kind of bring them out of this I'd say at the moment for many workers who are struggling to find work at all or even part-time jobs, really providing that certainty.
In your piece, you describe an economy with many new kinds of jobs in it. So if the Green New Deal comes to pass, what kinds of jobs do you foresee?
Right. So I think there's this mentality, even going back to the stimulus package 10 years ago, following the Great Recession, of sort of job creation and coming out of this period of really job destruction. And to me, as we think of this transition to, well, a clean economy as envisioned in the Green New Deal, but really just a more opportunistic economy overall, it can't just be about jobs, right? It has to be about long-term career pathways, really workforce development. When we think of our infrastructure investments in particular, it's not just short-term construction projects, although those are certainly important. It's really long-term operation and maintenance, right? So when we think of our power plants, we think of our utility systems, when we think of even wind turbines and other sort of new technologies that are coming about here, it's going to take a lot of different workers, not just sort of short-term construction laborers, if you will. But we know that as we make this transition, there are going to be increased demands on not only our existing workforce, but actually recruiting and training and retaining a younger workforce too. So it's not going to just start and end within the next decade, for example.
I see. And so just to take it a little further, we're not just talking about people who can do solar installations. There's other types of jobs that you see coming.
Absolutely. So it's not just sort of these isolated opportunities and, in one or two or three markets right across the country, but really what are all types of regions doing to advance a transition to a cleaner economy? What types of employers, not just, I would argue, not just energy employers, right, but even in transportation and logistics and other sectors throughout the economy. I mean, there's really a variety of pathways, I think, in this space, and it's something that my colleagues and I are looking into of just not just sort of the macro sort of trends, if you will, of, well, there are going to be X million jobs created over so many years, but actually, well, there are hundreds of occupations found throughout really this very diffuse idea throughout the economy. And what's that going to require in terms of training, in terms of equipping workers with the skills that they're going to need to succeed and ultimately not only help their own careers, but help all of us transition to that cleaner economy?
Yeah, a number of things come to mind when you're bringing this up. As a reporter, we are based out of Pittsburgh. We hear a lot from people in coal country who are, there have been struggles in retraining workers in coal country for more future-looking jobs. And also you referenced the recession about 10 years ago. I remember going to a manufacturing plant in Ohio. They're making wind turbines, and what the company head said was, we can't find people who can do these jobs. We go to high schools and try to recruit young people and say, hey, you don't need to go to college. You can do this, and we'll pay for the training. And they still were having a hard time finding people doing this kind of heavy work, heavy sort of manufacturing work.
Absolutely not. It's not new. I mean, these are issues that have preceded even the introduction of the Green New Deal. But the Green New Deal in some ways has kind of shined more light, I think, on these career pathways and possibilities. And hopefully that greater visibility is leading to additional conversations, not just in Washington, on Capitol Hill, but also really throughout the country, as you're saying, really that what are the jobs at play here? Who are the workers who can fill these jobs? And really what are going to be the platforms and policies that are going to help us get there?
And so do you think the Green New Deal actually has a chance to equalize the economy, as it kind of, it sounds like an idealistic goal, but it sounds like what you're saying is there may really be some opportunities for people who maybe wouldn't have had those without this kind of an ideological push behind it?
Sure. I mean, look, the Green New Deal, I think it has pried open this policy window, right, where even just a few months ago, we weren't even really talking about some of these topics, right? So in effect, even if the Green New Deal doesn't really go anywhere in Washington, it has, I think, opened people's minds to some of these issues that really aren't new, and if anything are only demanding more attention, not just nationally but at a state and at a local level too. Whether it takes putting out those big ideas, right, to initiate some of these conversations, all the better. But I think we need to. It would help, I think, to move beyond just sort of the politics of this, right, and really think of, okay, well, what are some of the ideas? What are some of the very tangible next steps that could be taken from sort of this vision and actually translated into feasible action.
And just kind of as a look at the policy and this idea of creating a Green New Deal, when you see the Washington Post, you see some conservatives who see human-caused climate change as a real problem that needs to be addressed very quickly. And they are all calling for carbon pricing as the most important first step, and going further to call the jobs guarantee and the Green New Deal, as we mentioned, socialism or just a distraction from the important task of dealing with climate change. What do you think about that kind of view, that we just need to focus on climate change and not get muddled in social policy?
Look, I mean, whether we focus on climate policy or social policy by themselves, those are complex enough. Combining them together doesn't exactly make the political math any easier. And I think, you talk to most anyone in Washington, whether they're on the Hill or elsewhere, I think they realize that. But, I think the reality at the moment is that probably the Green New Deal isn't going to go anywhere very quickly. But it is providing sort of fodder, I would argue, for a bigger debate, right, around what should we focus on, kind of what we're talking about here today.
And are we already seeing in some of those areas that are experiencing climate change the growth in these kinds of jobs, the jobs that we're going to need to deal with the effects of climate change?
I would look less at sort of job counts. That's often a very visible, sort of politically convenient way of thinking of some of these workforce issues of, well, we added X thousands of jobs in this market, thus it's sort of a victory. But actually what I would think of is, okay, well, we're having these climate pressures. We may have actually experienced some of these issues firsthand, are dealing with the costs right now. What is our workforce ecosystem that's currently in place? Do we have the talent in place right now who are going to be ready to take on some of these tasks in years to come? I know that we have seen some of this in New Orleans, right, which is kind of the sort of the go-to example of the need for investing in more resilient infrastructure post-Katrina in particular, where we are seeing many more local collaborations and investments, not just in the physical infrastructure, but also in the talent that's going to be overseeing and ultimately powering that infrastructure for years to come. And so that, to me, is going to spell, I think, a longer-term mark of success than sort of just the total number of jobs created here. And I would say also, just from a research perspective, it's hard to even calculate at times the total number of jobs created. There have been many studies that have come out that are terrific, but I think they feed, unfortunately, into this continued sort of political cycle of, well, are we getting the best bang for our buck, right, of how many jobs we're creating versus actually equipping workers with the skills they need and actually supporting those workforce development systems that are going to be really essential here.
Okay, well, thanks, Joe.
Thanks, Julie.
Joseph Kane is a senior research associate with the Brookings Institution. After a quick break, a different view on the Green New Deal and the push to put a price on carbon.
This is James Frazier, father of Trump on Earth co-host Reed Frazier. I support Trump on Earth on Patreon, and so should you. Go to patreon.com/TrumpOnEarth to find out more. Thanks.
When it comes to climate policy, the Green New Deal, as introduced, is an expensive proposal, but the Washington Post and others have argued that the country needs a laser focus on reducing carbon in the atmosphere by putting a price on carbon. To hear more about that, we're talking with former Republican Congressman Bob Inglis of South Carolina. He's executive director of a nonprofit organization called republicen.org. Hi, Congressman.
Hello, great to be with you.
And in Republic EN, the EN stands for?
Energy and enterprise and environment and all those good things.
So maybe we could start with you describing the organization. What is republicen.org?
We're a group of conservatives out to convince fellow conservatives to step forward and enter the competition of ideas about climate change solutions. Thus far, the climate change conversation has mostly been conducted in the language of the left, doing with less, repenting, corporations are evil, those sorts of things. Well, that's a conversation that conservatives can't enter. So we go to them and we say, let's talk about energy abundance, more energy, more mobility, more freedom. Let's talk about the power of the free enterprise system to innovate and the power of market signals. And we're literally on the ground with conservatives in target districts, helping to build a constituency for action. It's educational work that we do, but it's also education with a point of view that conservatives have a lot to offer here, and that this is a problem with a solution if we engage with free enterprise principles.
Yeah, and so when you heard about the Green New Deal and the introduction of this broad resolution, what was your reaction?
I really appreciate the sentiment of the Green New Deal. It is a reality that we need to act quickly to avoid the worst of climate change. But the solution, of course, is, I think, in free enterprise and in a simple internalization of the negative externalities. I know that makes me sound like an economist, but I'm not an economist. It basically just means put all the cost in on all the fuels through a carbon tax, pair that tax with a dollar for dollar reduction in other taxes or a dividend of all of the money back to the people, apply it at the borders, collect it from those countries that don't have such a tax, and then the free enterprise system will sort this out. We're all complicit in this. It's not that ExxonMobil is some terrible group of people. I use their product. I'm completely complicit with them in creating CO2 emissions. And so the question is, how do you innovate? How do you get to the place where we're driving electric cars on sunshine from our roofs and our garages? And that will come through free enterprise innovation, not by punishing corporations, but rather by recognizing them as innovators.
I want to explore this carbon tax or carbon pricing idea, but let's just go back for a second. So when we talk about the Green New Deal and some of these broader social policy objectives in there, the jobs portion, for example, the economic equalization idea, and some say that's an essential part of climate policy, but it sounds like you disagree with that.
Yeah, I was in Congress when in 1993, when a brand new president, Bill Clinton, was attempting to do health care, and Hillary Clinton was on the Hill testifying. It basically consumed that entire Congress. Time went by, and then came another Congress, and Barack Obama was president. It essentially consumed that Congress. That was for one element that's proposed in the Green New Deal. So what I would say to people who are supporting the Green New Deal is consistent with what you just indicated from the Washington Post, and that is, let's not try to solve all the problems of the world in one piece of legislation. Because if you do, any one of the pieces there, the healthcare part of it, the universal basic income part of it, we're talking massive pieces of legislation there, and massive involvement by all the committees of Congress to make that scale of change. So if we're really concerned about climate change being the thing that we must address quickly, then okay, let's address it quickly, and let's not try to carry along with it all these other things that would make it much more difficult to get passage.
Yeah, and so you were talking about a carbon tax. Is that what you would call it?
Yeah. Some people like to call it a fee and avoid the word tax, but it's a tax. The key to it is that it's paired with a reduction in other taxes or a dividend of all of the money back to the taxpayer. And so this pricing of carbon dioxide is a way of correcting the market distortion that exists in the lack of accountability for the cost associated with the burning of fossil fuels.
So, some might say, well, I guess you are addressing this in some way, but I'm just trying to understand your program a little. This is different from, say, President Obama's Clean Power Plan that tried to reduce carbon coming from coal plants and other power, electricity producers.
That's right. President Obama proposed a regulatory approach, and that's a respectable approach. It's just one that doesn't warm the hearts of conservatives like me and the people we're trying to reach at republican.org. What warms our hearts is what Milton Friedman said to do one time on the Phil Donahue show when Phil Donahue asked him, what do you do, Dr. Friedman, one of Reagan's economics advisors, about pollution if you don't want to regulate it? And Friedman says, well, you tax it, of course. You tax pollution. And that is a rock-solid conservative approach to dealing with the problem of pollution, is you bring accountability to those emissions, and you make it so that the product produced in that process bears its full cost and presents that full cost to the audience of the market. And when that market sees the true cost, it says, whoa, give me something else. This is too expensive. And so at that point, wind and solar and better nuclear do better than coal, for example, and put coal out of business.
What are you seeing from Republicans, from conservatives? Are you getting folks on board here? Are you seeing more and more support for this? Do you think you have any chance at passage of something along these lines?
Things are beginning to move. It's very exciting. On February the 6th, for example, the headline from the Republican side of the Energy and Commerce Committee in the House really said it all. That headline read, Republicans are focused on pragmatic solutions to climate change. It's a huge switch from the previous Congress. Part of that may be political, the awareness that, if you want the majority back in the House, that runs through suburbs, and those suburban voters apparently rejected this retro affect on disputation of climate change. And so, or it may be substantive, just the awareness that comes from Hurricane Florence dropping 50% more rain on North Carolina, or the fires in California, or droughts in other places. We're all experiencing climate change, and it's coming closer to us. And so it's either substantive or political, but in any event, it's starting to turn.
And what about some of these other ideas in the Green New Deal? How do we move forward with the need for sustaining wages for families, with retrofitting buildings and the transportation system, and energy efficiency and moving to renewable energy? How do we move forward in all those kind of social policies that are addressed in the Green New Deal?
Along with healthcare and other things, yeah. And so it's all those things are surely worthy of Congress's attention. It's just that if you believe that it's that it really is an emergency situation, then let's take that up first, and then deal later with a huge debate, for example, on universal basic income. There's a good debate to be had on that, but for goodness sakes, it is a huge decision. It's sort of like trying to have open heart surgery at the same time that you're having a knee replacement. You really wouldn't do that. You would probably put off the knee replacement while you're doing the open heart surgery. Recover from the open heart surgery, and then let's talk about the knee replacement. Climate change is that open heart surgery. We can come back later and talk about the knee surgery of a universal basic income, or a hip replacement of healthcare for that covers all Americans. Those things can be taken up later after we get the heart pumping just right.
Okay, well, let's leave it there. Former South Carolina Congressman Bob Inglis is Executive Director of RepublicEN.org, Conservatives Who Support Climate Action. Thank you so much for joining us.
Great to be with you. Thanks, Julie.
Thanks for listening to Trump on Earth. You can find us online at trumponearth.org or wherever you get your podcasts. Our show is produced by Andy Cubis. I'm Julie Grant.